Obamacare under fire on several fronts. President Obama's controversial health care law is facing challenges from the courts, the White House, and 2020 Democrats. Erin Hawley is a senior legal fellow at the Independent Women's Law Center and married to Republican Senator Josh Hawley. Thanks for joining us. Kicking things off, when we talk about Obamacare, it's kind of incredible. It's been almost 10 years now. The law has been picked at, and not just by Republicans, also by Democrats as well. But really, the courts have done a number. So your thoughts, where's the greatest challenge coming from right now when it comes to this particular part of the former president's legacy?
Well, I think if we're talking about today, the greatest challenge might perhaps be from the courts, at least in part. Just a couple of weeks ago, the Fifth Circuit issued a decision in the Azar case. And in this case, as the clip you played from President Trump indicated, the Fifth Circuit struck down the individual mandate, the really controversial part of the law that required individuals to buy insurance.
Yeah, and then, upheld on appeal. Then there's the GOP-led suit arguing that really the whole thing should be scrapped. So is that really one to watch? We just need to look at sort of the variety of potential lawsuits that could come.
So I think this lawsuit is important for the constitutional principle that it sets up. So it's important to look at the background of this case. And in 2012, there were 6 justices that found that the individual mandate was unconstitutional under the Commerce Clause. And this was the ground that Congress had relied on. And instead of looking at the Commerce Clause, what the court did was they turned to the taxing power and they reinterpreted the individual mandate's penalty to be a tax and said, okay, if we look at this as a tax, if we sort of strain incredulity and look at this as a tax, then we can uphold the individual mandate. But then, of course, comes the 2017 Congress, and they zero out that mandate. So now you have a tax that raises zero revenue. And so the question is this still a tax? And the Fifth Circuit, I think, rightly said no, because otherwise you would have an unlimited taxing power in which the government could require anyone to do anything without being held to the political accountability of actually issuing a tax.
Yeah, and we've seen, congressional action in the Senate recently. It'll be very interesting to see what happens after the 2020 elections on this issue.
Absolutely.
But speaking of the 2020 elections, it's not just Republicans that have essentially gone after Obamacare. Democrats out on the campaign trail have talked a lot about tweaking America's healthcare system, rolling out their own plans. Among them, Pete Buttigieg. He has talked about, here's a headline from the Washington Post on Buttigieg, his revamped version. Buttigieg's health plan hinges on supercharged version of unpopular Obamacare mandate. He's talked about essentially what he considers the moderate alternative to Obamacare, offering government-sponsored plan to those who want it, while letting others still keep their private insurance, what they like, that sort of thing. What do you think about sort of the moderate challenge, the tweaking of Obamacare?
Well, I think it's certainly true that might be a less drastic step than going sort of the far left Medicare for all route. But all of these proposals from the left are sort of Obamacare, as you said, on steroids. So all of them take what I think is a failed proposal and sort of double down on this. They double down on big government. And I think the Republicans in Congress have the right idea in fixing the flaws to Obamacare, not making it bigger, but making sure that Americans have access to what the name says, to actually affordable insurance while protecting those with pre-existing conditions.
Yeah, there's always that question of how does all of this get paid for. But as you mentioned, let's lean a little bit more left. We have a little soundbite. This is from Bernie Sanders. This is from the most recent rally out there talking about Medicare for all.
What we have to do is make clear that the function of health care is to provide health care to all and not make huge profits for the insurance companies and the drug companies. And the best way to do that, the simplest way to do that, is through a Medicare for all single-payer program.
Now, he's touted his plan, Elizabeth Warren as well, sort of in that more progressive angle of creating health care plans. Is that the threat to Obamacare, that there's a whole contingent of folks in the Democratic Party that really want to see things go further and further and further?
I think it certainly is, in the sense that you're seeing the left push toward ever bigger government. And here you have a doubling down and saying Obamacare is not enough. This individually mandated insurance and subsidies are not enough. We need to have health care for all. But again, I think the key is looking at the Obamacare and the failures in that law and fixing them, rather than doubling down on this idea of big government with its $32 billion price tag. And here in the United United States, we actually have access to world-class health care. If you look at the statistics, this past year, I think 70% of Americans were able to see a specialist, as opposed to countries with health care for all, like Canada, where about 40% did. So we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We need to keep our health care at the world-class system that it is, while making it affordable. And I think Congress can work on that.
You know, just realistically, looking ahead, we've seen the players in the game that are out there politically. What do you think will happen to Obamacare in the coming years?
So I think to go back to the court case, and that's more of my area, and when you look at that case, the Fifth Circuit issued a really interesting ruling on severability, and they basically kicked that decision, and severability is just a fancy legal word for determining how much of the law falls. Mm-hmm. So of course, under our Constitution, Congress writes the laws and the courts are just supposed to interpret it. So in this case, they found the individual mandate was unconstitutional, so that part of the law falls, but they didn't know how much else would go with it. And that question is one of congressional intent. So they sent it back to the district court to look at that question in light of what the 2017 Congress did. And I think that's really important because it shows the correct balance between Congress and the courts. The courts are supposed to implement what it is that Congress has done. So they directed it to the district courts. And the important thing also is that Americans get to keep their insurance. As the president said, and no one's insurance changes. This will work its way through the courts. And meanwhile, Congress has time to fix problems with the Affordable Care Act.
All right, Erin, Hawley, thank you so much. I know there are a lot of people that would like some stability to have some idea what's going to happen in their health care in the years ahead all across America. Thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you.
Retailers